As I joke around with David, he's like the Billy Crystal of the Oscars for us. David has spoke many, many, many times because he's probably one of the best at it. And pay attention, relationships he makes here over the years. How many franchisors have you invested in now, David? Too many. I said, I look at Rob yesterday, and David might be more invested in more brands than he is. So thank you again, David. A lot of cases we tell David, and he goes, don't worry about it. I got it taken care of. I'll put in something there, and it always works. So, David.
Good morning. It is great to be here. I've had the opportunity to meet many of you. Many of you I've known for a long time. For those I haven't met, I look forward to hopefully spending some time with you and meeting you in the future. I guess by way of introduction, I'd like to say I'm one of you, and that's one of you of anybody in this room. I have been blessed, yes, with what you saw up there, but started out candidly early in my career, in 1991 at Pizza Hut. I oftentimes say I was a driver. I wasn't, but I did start at Pizza Hut, went from there to Great American Cookies, and have had some wonderful opportunities along the way. But as part of that, I've had the opportunity to actually not start brands, but grow brands and invest in brands that might have 6 units, 5 units. I'm now part of brands that have over 1,000 units. I'm part of brands that are opening new restaurants every other day. I'm part of stable brands that just are mature and candidly are growing at about 5% a year. So wherever you are in your journey, as a franchisor, I'm one of you. If you're a franchisee in the room, I'm one of you. I'm a franchisee of KFC, Taco Bell, Capriati's, Spice and Tea Exchange, Lash Lounge, and possibly a few others, Domino's Pizza. So I'm one of you, and of course the suppliers in the room know I also do a fair amount of franchise development work, and so I'm one of you. I say that just by way of connectivity, that we are one big family and we're all in this together. So it is, again, wonderful to be here. As I went through yesterday, I will say I took a lot of notes. I completely changed my talk. Those of you who know me know that literally I finished this 10 minutes ago, sitting over there, because I try to speak to whatever's going on in the room. So I wrote a lot of questions down. I wrote a lot of thoughts. Those are in my talk. But I'll tell you the biggest question I ended up with yesterday was, what was the point of Lane's story? I mean, I sat there at 11:30 last night trying to put this talk together, and I'm like, I don't know. And candidly, maybe I shouldn't say this at 11:30 last night, but candidly, I was sitting there thinking, I kept wanting it to climax. Like, didn't you feel like you saw the picture of the Cavs, and then there was going to be like this race and this wreck and a fight, and Lane was coming out victorious, and I was like, there's going to be a climax to this story. And I kept waiting and waiting. And those that know his wife, Michelle, I just thought, God love her. So anyways, I say that all in jest. Lane and Brad are dear friends. I was involved in IFA in the 90s. I went away for a 10-year hiatus. I literally coached, is what I did. I coached my kids' sports for about 10 years, was not involved in very much business. They got to high school, and I decided to get back in the game. And when I did so, as Brad mentioned, met at Steve Greenbaum's house with a bunch of people. They took me under their wing, and I got back involved in IFA. And IFA, as I said, is a family. or franchising more broadly as a family, and that family certainly is special. And I think that's what we celebrate while we're here today, right? We celebrate being able, it's been a rough 18 months. It's been tough for this country, it's been tough for the world, but we're blessed. We live in a great country. There's 27 countries in the world today that still don't have a vaccine. We led the way. That lets us be here today, and we should celebrate that as well. But part of it is celebrating relationships, celebrating people. And in that regard, I guess today, part of what I want to talk about is leadership and mentorship. And I do this talk today somewhat in honor of my mother. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer just 3 days ago. That's on my mind. And so as I think through mentorship, I think all of us need to reflect, who are those people that touched us, right? The fact of the matter is, I often use the saying, when you see a turtle on a fence post, what do you know? You just know one thing. It didn't get there by itself. And so while I've been blessed, the fact of the matter is I graduated from college, started out like many of you with nothing. I actually lived with my mom because I couldn't afford rent and she couldn't afford rent. And so we lived together till the day I was married. Maybe sadly for my wife, because the first time she said, "Today's your day to clean the bathrooms," I said, "Say what?" But my mom and I lived together. She's a wonderful lady, 89 years old. And so today I offer up this talk in honor of her and hope that it's certainly a blessing to you all. So with that, thank you. Thank you for that. So I changed my talk in this way. I switched this talk, and I decided I would start with Musings by David. Many of you have heard me speak at like Unconference or IFA. Oftentimes I teach Socratically, and what that means is I work the crowd, and we all learn together, right? We learn through mutual experiences. Difficulty is with 400 people in the room, that becomes a little more difficult. I have asked for 2 mics to be available, so we might go through this. But what I thought I'd do is I took a lot of notes yesterday, and I thought I would just have Musings by David to start us. We're going to do about 10 minutes of that. Then I'm going to talk about culture of growth. As I saw a show of hands yesterday, and just let's double check this, show of hands of franchisors. Less than 50 units, okay? Franchisors greater than 50 units, okay? I will admit I'm primarily talking today to those less than 50 units. And there's learnings here hopefully for everyone, but really want to give you some learnings from those of us who've gone before. So we're going to talk about culture growth, and then I'm going to turn it to leadership. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're going to grow your business, you're going to have to be a great leader. And so I always start most of my talks all about people. In fact, I named my company, People Make the Difference Restaurants. It's PMTD Restaurants. And I did that for a reason. The fact of the matter is I'm not that involved day to day. But when I walk in a restaurant, they know that I named that company. And they will tell me if we're not living by the core values. And it's directly in the name. So I mentioned that people make the difference because your concept can be great. Your business model can be phenomenal. And certainly financial resources are important. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't have the right people, and I'm going to even challenge you, if you're not the right person, it's going to be difficult to grow. So let's start with that because that's where I'm going to end, is all about people. So musing number 2. And I said this yesterday in one of the breakouts. Someone asked the question, how do I go get a multi-unit franchisee? And I said, if you're below 50 units, please don't focus on it. Don't focus on it. Focus on your system. If you are a right system, you will attract the right people. We say that oftentimes to our daughters, right? We say to them, just be the right person. You'll attract the right person. Don't go chasing. And I'm saying the same thing in regards to this business. Don't chase the multi-unit. And so what we have to do is build a system that is built for an average franchisee on an average day with an average work ethic. And too often what we do is we try to build a system that is for the perfect franchisee. And then we want to blame the average franchisee and say, well, if these people weren't so average, my system would do better. It's a key learning. Franchising by its nature is two items here I want you to focus on. Predictable cash flows to an average franchisee. I'm going to say it again. It's predictable cash flows to an average franchisee. So how do you go about doing that? You have to build a system that when you build a unit or they open a unit, you have good belief in your system, in your heart, that it's going to be predictable and you know what those cash flows are going to be. And to an average franchisee. And don't let your team sit around and go, well, if we just had better franchisees. Because that's not what we're talking about, right? It's your system for an average franchisee. So that's what I believe franchising is, and predictable is a big word. It's a big word that was talked about even yesterday during lunch, because your valuations are based upon your predictability. If I know I can go build 100 of your units on average, and they're going to do X, it's pretty easy to value your company. What happens is we get this huge disparity. We have great franchisees, we have bad franchisees, and then we have this huge disparity. Or we have good locations, bad locations. And so it's about creating predictability of your business model. Number 3, yesterday there was discussion of 100 units. And people kept saying 100 units. And the data is, and this is from Fran data, there's 3,200 units or franchises that file an FDD per year, or roughly. 16% of those have 100 units. That means 84% don't, right? So why is that important? Anybody have an idea? Why do we talk about 100? Profitable, Red said. How many think that how many that, let's say somebody's at 20 says, shoot, I can be wildly profitable at 70 units, right? That's the general thought. So I put together some quick data for you. The data here is, let's just take number of stores, and we're going to use, in this case, an AUV of $700,000, because I know there are a lot of service businesses in the room, okay? So some are going to have 500,000, some are going to have 700,000. So if you did that, you then see the system-wide volumes. If you take a royalty percentage of 6%, at 30 units, that's $1,260,000, and at 100, it's $4,200,000. Everybody follow me on the math? Roughly, in most cases, about half of that goes to personnel, and probably half goes to other G&A. And so if half of my royalty there is going to the personnel up to that level, we begin scaling wildly, and you get great flow through after this. But in essence, at $90,000 a person, fully loaded, right? So I have some people more expensive, some less, fully load them with benefits and everything else. I'm saying I have to support 100 units with 23 people. Some concepts can do that, some can't. My point is, I would say roughly somewhere between 70 and 100 franchisors hit break even. And when I talk about break even, I'm not saying you can't make a little money along the way, but if you're truly going to be about supporting your franchisees, you're forward investing. So what happens is, if I'm going to grow crazy fast and it's a brick and mortar, now I have to hire a real estate person. Now I have to hire a construction person, and I still don't have royalty revenue, right? I'm forward investing. If it's a service business, I probably need to invest more in training. I need more field personnel. And so I'm forward investing before the revenue comes in. And as a result, I have difficulty hitting the income numbers I always thought I would hit. And so I talk to franchisors all the time that might have 20 units, and they go, next year, gonna crush it. Gonna crush it. And then I talk to them a year later, and they're at 30 units. They're, next year, I'm gonna crush it. And I want you to know it's an endurance test. And you've heard people up here who've had great success. But I will suggest that they found predictable cash flows for an average franchisee, and they were willing to forward invest. And they saw the long ball that we had to get over 100 units. Next musing. So why is it, if 84% of the concepts don't get to 100 units, why is that? And I would contend it's lack of capital. And everyone shakes their head, yes, if I just had more money. But I actually think it's two things. It's lack of financial capital, and it's lack of intellectual capital. And I would contend that the intellectual capital might be more important than the financial capital. And where you sit as a young franchisor, you believe that if I could just get the financial capital, then I could solve everything else. I would contend if you got the right intellectual capital around it and got good predictable cash flows for an average franchisee, you can attract the financial capital in today's world. There's a lot of financial capital out there chasing deals. So self-reflect on that as we go through today. Musing number 5, be diligent about corporate versus franchisee. This will creep into your discussions, and it always does. And this is why I'm talking about when they say, I wish we had better franchisees, your employees, you got to stop it. You just got to cut it immediately. It's a cancer, I will tell you. If you let that get in your system, it will be franchisee versus corporate. And everything will be franchisee's fault. You know, we always have, forget franchising for a moment, you always have an ops versus marketing contention, right? That always happens. Marketing says, if we just had better operators. And operators say, well, if I just had better marketing. We've always had that. But now you throw in this dynamic of franchisees. And you cannot allow, as the leader of a system, this to creep in. So fight it, fight it, fight it. Musing 6. So how do you create this connection to the field? You do it through your own leadership. You have to get out of the weeds. You'll hear me say this later. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot stay in your corporate office. I see this all the time. Franchisors get to about 20 units, and they somehow the success gets created in that headquarters, and it doesn't. And when I'm working with young franchisors, and when I say young, meaning not a lot of units, push yourself to get out in the field. When I first became a CEO, I was in the field every other week. That's where the action is. That's where reality is. People will tell you what you want to hear. Franchisees will be honest with you. You get back to corporate, they're going to tell you how great you are. Go out, hear how bad you are. That's how you'll improve the system. And that's how you'll make your cash flows, again, more predictable for an average franchisee. The other technique would be lead on the phone. I used to, when I was CEO at Great American Cookies, I would bring in, we would have calls set up with franchisees 3 to 5 per week, and I'd do it with the department heads. And the franchisees could say anything, and our job was to listen. Not to debate, not to tell them they were wrong. They're your customer. Just to listen and say, okay, that was their perception. Why is that? Sometimes it's reality, sometimes it's perception. Doesn't matter. That's your validation call. So if you're going to let that just sit out there, you got to figure out how you're going to fix it, even if it's perception. Next musing, number 7. I hear oftentimes questions on compliance. They say if my franchisees would just comply. I'm going to back you up and say start with adoption. And adoption equals engagement. So start with engagement. What's that mean? If your franchisees are not on your webinars, ask yourself why. If they're not showing up to the convention, ask yourself why. Those are the barriers you got to break down. If you get franchisees loving your brand, wanting to be at your convention, wanting to be on your webinars, not wanting to miss your calls, I guarantee you that engagement will equal adoption. And if they adopt, they will comply. But if you think you're going to go in with some checklist and say the name tag was out of order, the POP was wrong, they didn't clean their machinery, and so here's your checklist, Mr. Franchisee, I'll see you next month, you're never going to build your system. I'm pushing this because it's self-reflection, folks. It's how can I create an environment that my franchisees want to be engaged. These are all, again, comments that I heard yesterday, and I'm just reacting to them. Musing number 8. Need to balance the needs of the company operating and franchisees is difficult. Everybody thinks, well, I can have company-operated stores, franchise-operated stores, and you can actually. When you get up near 50, 100 units, it's fairly easy. Because what you do is you have different departments, right? When you have 10 units, I find this really hard. Because where are your best people going to be? You can't have a slew of best people. You have one great person. What are you going to do with that person? You got all this EBITDA coming from your company-operated unit, and you don't want that to go away because that's the lifeblood, that's your cash flow. But you got franchisees suffering. What are you going to do with that person? There's not a perfect answer here, but it's hard. And the one thing you don't want to do is play yo-yo. Don't sling them in for 3 days and sling them back out. And sling them in, sling them back out. That person will get frustrated, they'll leave. And now you're just going to have twice the problem. So figure out what you got to solve for and figure out really what's your long-term plan. If your long-term plan is all about franchising, you might have to put some of your company-operated revenue at risk. And if your long-term plan is, I'm going to kind of balance both, then you're going to, again, have to forward invest. Go get 2 great people. But you need to think through this because it will happen to you. Musing number 9, not all EBITDA is created equal. I heard this when I was 31. I didn't understand it. I fully understand it now. Not all EBITDA is created equal. That's to say, not all cash flow is created equal. Jeremy said this yesterday. Predictable cash flows is what you want. Predictable cash flows. Where are my predictable cash flows? They're sitting in royalties, manufacturing margin. If you manufacture something and every time they sell something you get a royalty and you get a manufacturing margin and it happens every single time, that's predictable. Technology fees, predictable. What are one-time fees? Initial franchise fees, sale of company units, international. They're wonderful. They can be your lifeblood. But don't think you added great value to your company. The long-term value is predictable cash flows. Number 10, determine what you're good at and be crazy at it. So the last hitter, I think, now I'm showing my age. I'm debating whether this was true. I think Ted Williams is still our last 400 hitter. Is that correct? Yes. Rod Carew almost made it in the 70s, like 399. Okay, so Ted Williams, many of you know, baseball player, Boston Red Sox. I knew actually as the manager of the Washington Senators. That's how long ago this is, in the 1970s. But he wrote a book on hitting of baseball. And he took the strike zone and he laid out the spots that he knew he could hit and the spots he knew he couldn't. And so on first pitch strike, he would let a strike go by because he knew he couldn't hit that pitch that well. Even if it was a fastball, he knew if it was down and in, That wasn't a Ted Williams pitch. Think about it for your business. What's your sweet spot? What can you hit? What's your point of difference? You cannot be all things to all people. We already talked about limited resources. If you have less than 50 units, you have limited resources. You need to figure out, what's my point of difference? What do my franchisees need? What's going to create value? What's going to create predictable cash flows, right? And we're going to do that through building a brand that has a point of difference. You cannot be all things to all people. Part of strategy is prioritization and figuring out what you're going to say no to. Musing number 10, this was mentioned yesterday. Also, elevate yourself, get out of the weeds. I want you in the weeds 90 straight days. I want you in your units 90 straight days. I want you in your meetings 90 straight days. I want you working 14-hour days 90 straight days. And then I want you to figure out how you take 3 days a quarter, or maybe less, maybe it's even one. Elevate yourself. No meetings. Step back, determine, what's my point of difference? Am I really living the truth? Is that where we're headed? Does it make sense? What's the holistic plan? What's working? Ask yourself, ask your team, ask your franchisees, what's working, what isn't working? Let's do a lot more of what's working, and let's do a lot less of what's not working. Because as entrepreneurs, what happens is we, by nature, generate ideas. And we run to shiny objects. If you're honest with yourself, most of you who are true entrepreneurs are running to shiny objects. And you got a hold of a great shiny object and you have an idea. And that's wonderful. But you can't do that to your team or your franchisees every month. You have to figure it out. And the way you do that is you ground yourself once a quarter. And that's not a spreadsheet. I see so many people say, oh, yeah, I do planning. I do this Excel spreadsheet. I'm like, oh, that's good. And so you went from 20 units to 23 to 24. The reason they're not growing faster is because they haven't figured out their sweet spot. They haven't figured out what's their point of difference. They haven't figured out how to make a huge difference within the units. And that's where you have to get to. All right, so Musings by David. Thank you for letting me run through those. Hopefully there was a little tidbit. If you took one tidbit, it was worth it, okay? Let's talk about leadership and culture growth. I asked Sam Ballas, where's Sam? There's Sam. I asked Sam, if you could say one thing this morning, what would you say? And he said, build culture. So we're going to talk a little bit about culture. So let's talk about the company journey, or the journey in franchising. The journey is, we first have proof of concept, usually with a company-operated store. We then decide to franchise. Some of you are sitting right at that stage. Oftentimes then we have friends, family, or customers are our first franchisees. Sometimes it works. Most times it doesn't. Somebody walks in and says, I love your concept. I think you should franchise it. And you're like, I think I should too. And you jump in. And that's fine, but that's not the long-term business plan. So you end up having a difficult start. You might have the wrong counsel until you meet Lane. You might have the wrong PR person until you meet Brad and Sherry. Any number of fits and starts, but you have initial difficulty. Then you kind of get your sea legs, and you get a little rocket boost, and oftentimes first stage happens, and you get a lull. And all of a sudden, your validation of franchisees is going down. Maybe same-store sales have staggered or stagnated. And you yourself are starting to question yourself. And now you have franchisees who are selling transfer units right on top of you trying to sell new units. So everyone with greater than 50 units who's gone through this cycle, raise your hand if you've seen this movie, right? We see the hands? It's the same number of hands who told you they have 450. I'm just telling you, this is what happens. And you have to have the fortitude to say, I got it. I heard this. There was this bald dude up at Springboard that said this once before, and I'm going to figure this out. And then it's about fighting. It's about you fighting to get what you want, and then you get back to growth. But it's going to happen. It's fine. So what are we going to do to get past all that? We're going to build a system of culture. I actually believe the stage that many of you are in is building the foundation. What's the foundations? It's policy manuals. It's my basics of the system. The harder part is ahead of you. It's building a culture. And it's building a culture in franchising, which I will tell you is more difficult than a non-franchise company. Why is that? Because they're not your employees. And so you have to build a culture. And how do you build it? My opinion, you lead by example. You get in the stores. It's the same movie, right? You get in the stores. You lead by example. And that example has to include a service mentality, that you're here to serve, that you're here to serve your franchisees. I try never to have my companies name themselves the headquarters or corporate. I want to be the support center. That's what we are. Our customer is the franchisee. And we got to create that culture. And then by creating that culture with our franchisees, we get them to understand that their customer is the end user. But if they feel abused, if your franchisee feels abused, very different than an employee. You can't tell them don't feel abused, right? Just suck it up and do it. You can't tell a franchisee that. You have to service them, and then they'll service others. So how does this work within the company? The unfortunate part is, and the hardest challenge I find with young franchisors is they think their people that are on the team today are going to make the trip to 100 with them. And I hate to be this way. Probably no one on your team will be with you when you have 100 units. And this goes back to intellectual capital. It's sad to say, but it's just the truth. I've seen this movie 1,000 times. This graph here shows that let's say you had a group of people, and we're going to label them A, B, C, and Ds, okay? Our A's, and every company has this. Every company has A, B, C's, and D's. Our A's kind of decline in time. And our B's, let's say they just stagnate. And what I mean by stagnate, they stagnate in their effectiveness and their skills. And then I have a group of C's that grow. And those C's would be superstars at a lot of companies. But you're talking about taking a system from 20 to 100, and I hope you're talking about doing it within 3 years. That's 40 to 50% growth. There aren't a lot of companies in America that do that. So if you're growing at 40 to 50%, you are outgrowing your people. You are outgrowing your people, and I will tell you, if you're honest, there's going to be a stage where you might outgrow yourself. And so you ask me, why doesn't people get to 100 units? It's intellectual capital. This is the chart. This is it. And part of you sitting back quarterly is saying what's working, what's not, is who needs to be on this bus. And it's sad, and it's hurtful, but you can do it with respect. And you treat your people with respect, and they'll respect you, and people will take the journey with you, and they'll ride the bus as long as possible. And so part of that journey is worry about the Peter Principle. Here, who knows the Peter Principle? Come on, all the old people know the Peter Principle. Okay, so the Peter Principle is a short book. It's worth buying. It will tell you that what we do in corporate America is we keep promoting people till we can fire them, right? Let's just keep raising them up till they get to a level that they can't perform, and then we'll fire them. And so during your growth phase, you promote these people, but if you really had a vision to Next year, we're going to be double the size we are. Can this person really handle it? You probably wouldn't promote that person. And you know what? Then they have a chance at being with you when they're 100 units because you didn't put them in a position of failure. And that's the responsibility you have to take. It's a key chart if you want to get to 100 units. You need to understand it. So how would I start thinking about this? The way I think about this is about 30% of most companies have stars. 60% are good employees, 10% are just not good employees, right? And so you have to start thinking of a matrix. Where are my good employees? And what are their jobs? What are they doing? Because I want my best employees in my critical jobs. And oftentimes we put our best employees in our maybe not as important jobs. And this goes back to company operated versus franchise. You have to figure out what's the critical job. Put your talent there. Because we don't want to waste talent. And at the same time, we absolutely don't want to put our worst talent in our most critical jobs. Another way to think about this is stages of growth and how organizations kind of develop. So I think of startup growth, professionalized, scale, okay? And if you think of yourself, you're at the fulcrum between these two. Many of you, I would suggest, could get an advisory board. That might be friends or family. If you're less than 20 units, you probably don't want to pay your board. They're doing it because they love you. Maybe you get a supplier on there who knows franchising. Maybe you get another franchisor who you've befriended, who's small as well. Just someone to hold up the mirror, okay? And initially, your first employees, what are they? They're oftentimes turn into friends, and they're just athletes. They're generalists. They don't know marketing. They don't know digital marketing. They don't know operations. They don't know how to write a training manual. But they're good. And you employ them, and you all lock shoulder to shoulder, and you work your ass off. That is great. And everybody does it. And I'm not diminishing that one bit. But as you move up the ladder, what these yellow bars represent is we begin to functionalize, right? We have to begin having great digital marketing people. We have to begin having people who understand learning and development through the web. We have to have people who understand supply chain. You will not have that generally if you're less than 20 units. You can't afford it. That talent's too expensive. That's fine. But this goes back to why you're going to outgrow some of that talent. Because along the way, you're going to have to get people who are functionally more perfect than what you've had to date. And then, in addition, eventually you want to start having a board. And you want to get people around you who challenge you. And I know you're going to say, well, I can't afford that. I'm trying to give you what's the path to get to 100. 86% won't grow. Why won't they grow? Intellectual capital. Get some people around you who are willing to challenge you. As I think through people and setting culture, we oftentimes think of competency versus likability, right? If you look at the upper right, what that represents is who's likable and who's competent. We call those our lovable stars. All of us want lovable stars. Those who are incompetent and not likable are our incompetent jerks, right? If they're an incompetent jerk in the four walls of your support center, what do you think they are to your franchisees? You got to get rid of them. You got to get rid of them. That's how you create culture. You can't have incompetent jerks. And I'm suggesting that if you go back to that previous slide right here, they're sitting down in that group A. You should be getting rid of them anyways if you want to grow, because they're going to drag you. They're not even going to hold you steady. So let's focus on getting people with value, both competence and likability. Okay, that's a little bit about culture of growth. Let's talk to leadership. Let's talk about you. What's a leader got to do? I say this just off the tip of my tongue. I live it every day. A leader needs to create a vision, provide resources, break down barriers, hold people accountable, and be a cheerleader. Every time you're in a leadership moment, you should be doing one of these 5 things. If you're not doing one of these 5 things, you need to step back and ask yourself, what am I doing at this moment? Create a vision, sit back once a quarter and once a year, and create your vision. Cast a vision. Provide resources. When people come to you with problems, they should be asking one of these 2 questions. Hey, boss, I need X, or boss, I need you to break down Y. That's what a leader does. They're going to come to you constantly at this stage of your growth and ask you, where's the financial capital? If we just had more money. If we just had more money. And you have to cast a vision that gets beyond that. Why is that? You can go raise money, but you end up diluting yourself to the point that you're just an employee. So I'm trying to protect your equity. So you want to hold out on that stage as long as you can to build value. So figure out how you're going to provide resources the old-fashioned way. We're going to do it with sweat equity. We're going to work our ass off. That's what we're going to do. I've worked with one entrepreneur. He kept saying, David, what are we going to do? And I kept saying, entrepreneurs, figure it out. That's what entrepreneurs do. We just figure shit out, right? I don't know. You just figure it out. So breaking down barriers, your people are running into barriers all the time, especially franchisees. Your job is to break them down. As we think of leadership on the last 2, holding people accountable, we have to hold everyone accountable to the culture. Incompetent jerks, out. Franchisees, dishonest, out. Everybody else gets a seat on the bus, and we work with them. And you have to balance between this hold people accountable and be a cheerleader. And as you grow, what you'll find is, if you're over 100 units, I would suggest to those CEOs in the room, you become more of a cheerleader, less of holding people accountable, because your middle manager should be holding people accountable. When I now go to a unit in really every one of my companies, they know I'm coming. Why is that? Because my role is to be a cheerleader. I want to catch people doing the best. I'm essentially saying, show me your best. And people always say, well, you should do surprise visits. Really? I mean, that chart, I have quite a few units. I don't need to do surprise visits. I'm blessed. I'm not making light of that. I did. When I had 2 units, back in 1998, I had 2 units. I did surprise visits. I'd drive through the drive-through. They wouldn't know who I was. Sure, I did that. But now my job is to be the culture leader, the cheerleader, to show them that people make the difference and that we're here, and I'm here to provide resources and break down barriers. I'm not here to play gotcha. So you're going to have to figure that out with your franchisees. And I would suggest sometimes, if you're less than 20 units, you just want to show up in the market and just say, I happen to be in the neighborhood, and visit them. Other times, you want to be sure they know a month ahead. Why is that? You're saying to them, show me your best. And if you see something really terrible, you learned a lot. They showed you your best, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You saw it. If you're a great operator, you know. I can tell all my restaurant managers, I'm coming. And I can tell you how that unit's run when I leave, because they just showed me their best. So think about where you play in this role. So as leaders, especially less than 20 units, I think you got to reflect on also, how are you a beacon? How are you a visionary? Versus how are you an architect? And the difficult part is you got to do both. Now, many of us use a system called EOS, Show hands at who knows EOS, okay? EOS is Entrepreneurial Operating System by Gino Wickman. For those who want to have any further interest in it, it's a process by which we do many of the things I'm talking about, okay? But what we do is we take our entrepreneur and eventually move them to visionary. And then they hire an integrator. And the integrator, think of it as a COO. Keeps the trains running on time, does all that. Because why? Entrepreneurs love what? Shiny objects. So they want to run here and there, and we need an integrator to go, stop. Just frickin' stop. We got a system, we're going to run the system. So EOS helps us in that process. The fact of the matter is, if you're 20 units, you have to be both. You can't afford the talent. So you have to be both. But what I'm trying to get you to think about is, when are you both? And the way to do it is, I'll sit down once a quarter, I'm going to be a visionary. And then I'm going to put an integrator hat on. As hard as it is, I'm not going to chase shiny objects for the next 60 days. And I'm going to just do shit. And then I'm going to come back and be a visionary. Because you're going to have to be both. So as I think through COVID, I think of a managerial role. And I think that, oftentimes for young franchisors, what we did, we started our career or started this business as a producer. That's really what we were, right? We were a producer. We came up with an idea, especially in the service area. We might have put together a collection of tradespeople or whatever we did, and we produced. We went out and we sold. We set some systems. We produced. And then as we moved from that, we began more managerial roles. And eventually then you have to move to leadership. And this is where the intellectual capital falls apart. Is too many people get stuck in being managerial. If I think through COVID, I'll say for myself, I became managerial. Why is that? Because we became reactionary. My days used to be filled with setting visions. I would fill up my calendar of, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm casting forward. March 2020 hit. My world changed upside down. I became 100% reactionary. Phone rang, deal with the problem. Phone rang, deal with the problem. There was no casting a vision. And I would suggest many of us, and I'll raise my hand, many of us have not off-ramped back onto being a leader. We got stuck in this mode where what we do is we produce and we manage. And think about how you want to be a leader. Because if we get stuck being a manager, you're not going to grow your business. One quick area that I just always tell young kind of people who are managing people for the first time. And if you want to develop your people so that they take the trip with you, think of the 131. Here, anybody heard of 131? Okay, 131 is in essence, you're telling people, don't bring me the problem and expect me to have the answer. Because why? What's my roles as a leader? Cast a vision, provide resources, break down barriers, hold people accountable, and be a cheerleader. Where in that spectrum does it say I have all the answers? It doesn't. So the way you lead people is you 131 it. And what that means is they have to come to you. They have to say, boss, my problem is X. I've considered 3 solutions. Solution 1, 2, and 3. Here's what I like about each solution, and I've decided to do Y. Now what do? You provide the resources or break down the barriers to get to that solution. But what you're trying to teach them is come up with their own solution. The very first day I was CEO of Great American Cookies, the head of our manufacturing plant comes in. He says, boss, the gate that our trucks go through, we had barbed wire fence around the whole compound. That gate, it's broken. And I just kind of looked at him. I had never really managed people, to be honest. I was 31 years old. And I'd gotten there through the finance arm where we didn't have to manage a lot of people, but it just came naturally. And I looked at him, I said, Mike, and how am I going to add value to this problem? Right? I don't know anything about gates. I don't know how to fix a gate. I'd fix a gate. That's what I'd do, because I didn't think there was much else. The first weekend I was a franchisee of KFC, I had grown up in the corporate world of PepsiCo and Pizza Hut. And I decided in 1998, and I still don't know why, but I decided to buy 2 KFCs, one in Alex City, Alabama, one in Talladega. The only rule I had, it had to be more than 2 hours from my house, because I knew I would work the drive-thru for 80 hours a week if it was near my house. That is a true story. Okay, so the very first Friday night, a manager called me and said, boss, they don't call me boss, but I'm just using that term, David, our fryer just went down. Now, I had run 1,000 units at Pizza Hut, and I had never had that phone call. And he said, fryer's down. I was like, well, I don't know. I'd fix the fryer. I mean, and so today, you know, we have, I'm involved in over 1,000 units. I would like to think that we don't get those calls. There's appropriate checkpoints of spending CapEx dollars, yes. But if your fryer's down at a chicken store, guess what? Fix the fryer. So, but we have to bring our people along the journey is my point. And in your support center, you need to create a system. And one way to do it is 131, so they start learning. So thinking sequence of change management. What I'm showing here is we've been in a crisis, and how do we get to what I call the long march? And the long march is how do we get to 100 units? So characteristics of a long march is our speed is just steady, right? When we're fast and we're reactionary and we're crisis mode, it's just decision, decision, decision. We should slow down a little. What's our execution? It's not local. It's how do we make our execution about the system? How do we create our personnel from the bottom up? And we create that with culture. What's our conversation? When you're young and you're 20 units, you just go, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this. When you're 100 units, it's going to start becoming more conversational. Our skills, we seek to build skills inside instead of outside. What do I mean by that? When you're 20 units, you should be outsourcing as much as you can. Why is that? You want variable cost. It's something I haven't talked about. Create variability in your business model. So you want to be able to scale up, scale down. Bad times hit, boom, I get rid of these third-party contracts. Create a variable skill business model. As you create fixed costs in your business model, you will choke yourself. And you'll end up making stupid decisions as you build fixed cost. Because what happens is you're worried about making the next payment. So create variability. So in summary, gave you some musings, gave you some leadership thoughts. The biggest challenge I can give you is, look, franchising is all about people. It's about family. It's about honoring ourselves, honoring our family, blood family, but it's also about honoring our franchise family. You all take a great responsibility when you take someone's check. Honor that. Do the right thing by your franchisees. You take a great responsibility when you hire someone. These are life decisions, right? Be respectful. Do the right thing to your people. Educate them. That's why we talk about 131. I'm here to tell you they're probably not going to make the trip, but don't let it because you didn't try, right? And let them leave with dignity when they do leave, having known more than when they came with you. And you all grow together. Challenge yourself. It's about people. You can't just be challenging others. You need to look at yourself every quarter and say, am I the right leader at the moment? And I'm not suggesting as a result you sell the business, and I'm not suggesting you remove yourself. But you got to put talent around you that honors the other people and honors your franchisees to keep growing. Don't be the blockade. I will tell you, I really believe this. I think of the 86 systems that don't get to 100 units, my gut is half of those could. If they had the right intellectual capital, the right financial capital behind it, if they had the right intellectual capital, in today's world, Jeremy will tell you, they would get the right financial capital. Money is flowing out there. So honor people. Franchising is about people. It's changed my life. It's been the most rewarding thing I could have ever done. I fell into it, like many of you. It's been rewarding to my family, but it's also, I hope, been rewarding to others that I've been able to touch along the way. And to end, as Lane said, it's not easy, but you can bring it. That's why you're here, right? So let's all bring it together. Thank you.
Unbelievable. Please. Stay there.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
So that's incredible, and that speaks for itself. Do you have time for one question?
Yes,
One.
of course.
So what you're describing is it takes an incredible amount of courage to have the kind of insight that you're talking about and to take the kind of corrective action you're suggesting. But in the world, I'm trying to overlay that on the staffing crisis and people's fear of pulling the trigger because the person I bring in might suck worse and might last a week or do those other things. Is that something?
Yeah, can we go to that last slide of mine? This was not teed up.
Not teed up. That's absolutely not
This
teed
is
up.
not teed up, but I just want to touch on a few things since you did tee it up. So let me use this one. So look, to Lane's point, labor's taken center stage, right? This is in here because I started to put it in here. And I didn't want the minutia of labor to kind of take away from this. But this is a chart up to August 2021. What this shows is employment levels based upon, and seasonality adjusted, okay? Because we get a seasonal employment anyways. But you can see the first gray bar there is 7 and 8. So we had our dip, our recession. Labor's been growing steadily. And then, of course, we had COVID. We're not back to labor levels. We all know that. We can't find labor. What's interesting, though, is this is your participation. And this is through August 2021. This is from the Department of Labor. Labor participation has been declining since 2001. What that means is people are sitting on the sidelines already. What happened was COVID accelerated what was already a trend. And we see that throughout business, right? Pandemics, crisis, whether it's 08 or the pandemic, accelerate consumer trends. They accelerate employment trends. They don't change them. They accelerated it. So we were already having people not participate. We are now down to an all-time low of participation in the workforce. That means people who are capable of working have decided to sit it out. So what's that do? That creates a massive impact to our wages. We all know that. We see that. But what's interesting, and one of the things I wanted to point out, is in 08, that blip of the yellow line, that represents percentage of benefits increases. So yes, that's Obamacare. But I will tell you, we're seeing that across the board now, that employees who do want to participate are now asking more about their long-term benefits. So how do you, now going back to what Lane just asked, how do we balance these two? I think the way to balance it is internally, and I'm talking more to a franchise system, meaning your support center. You got to grow your people. You're going to have to invest more resources than I might otherwise because you're going to be moving people. If you're 20 units, you're moving people from being a generalist, remember that discussion, to a specialist. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to send them to seminars, and we might not have in the past. That's additional cost, yes. And we're going to get third-party outside resources to put around them. So in the past, I might have said, now's the time to move from being a generalist to a specialist. I'm going to hire an internal digital marketing person. Now, instead, I'm going to say, I'm going to send this person to a seminar, and we're going to hire an outside agency, And yes, it's all going to cost more money, but I at least have employees. Now, that's how I think of support center. It's all about training, learning, and development. As I think about my base for my franchisees, how do I attract talent? Biggest thing I can go back to is probably the Ted Williams picture. Get to a sweet spot that you make a difference and your business stands for something. And it really will attract the right franchisee, and they will attract the right people. There are people that are out there passionate that want to do certain things. Now, I'm not saying that's a panacea for everything, but if you're just blah, your employees already told you, they're out. They're sitting on the sidelines. So create a culture that stands for something, makes a difference. Then create a culture that you're making a difference in people's lives. I saw there was another chart I didn't include it here. There was just a study by Harvard on whether people care about community, cause, or compensation. And it was interesting because you always hear, well, the 20s and 30-year-olds, they care just about cause. And you could do it by age, and they were infinitesimally different. The difference between a 50-year-old and 20-year-old, not that different. We're all humans. Put our pants on the same way, most of us. So the way to do that is we got to create cause. What's the cause? What's the why of your business? We got to create community. That's the culture. And you're going to have to compensate. And the truth is the employee has the upper hand at the moment in that regard. That's fine. If you have a great business model, you'll still win. I've never worried about it. When I started in the business, I think minimum wage was $2.15 an hour. We've adapted. We'll figure it out. What do entrepreneurs do? They get shit done, right? I mean, just figure it out. So you'll figure it out. Got to keep your head up. I'll go back to being positive. You got to be positive. This can drag you down, but you got to be positive and think positive and spill positive and cast positive. Thank you.
Amazing. So the joke between us is I didn't know what David's presentation was till I was sitting here and it came out, and we've been doing this together for 10 years. But for 10 years, David comes out, because you can go see a number of speakers who will validate everything you're thinking and make you feel like everything you're doing is right? Nobody's better than you. But you know, those people are not, they're talking to an imaginary audience. David challenges you. Sometimes we kid around like to blow stuff up, right? The way you see how things land back down is if you blow them up. But sometimes you have to get yourself to those optics on what you're doing, on what you put together after day of adding person after person, and wonder whether you've done any good at all for the organization, for the company, and anything else. So I saw people writing like crazy, so I'm not going to ask you if you did, because I was writing like crazy. But if you don't leave this session with something to go back and ask yourself whether you, in fact, you use your dog's admiration of you when you get home as the only evidence of whether you're doing everything correct, recognize you can spend 5 minutes after that trying to figure out how you can be better. And the blessing for Brad and I, or for those that are focused to have the opportunity to put these people together, is you're not challenged like this at home. At home, you know what you have? A lot of yes men and women. A lot of people who like the job and like telling you you're number one. And maybe you are number one. That's the fact. That's what boss metaphor comes from. But he does this every time, and he knows I'd make him speak at anything he comes to, because you don't hear a word. Nobody uses the restroom, and I'm not even going to stop talking now for it. I'm going to shut up. But David comes to ski events that we've done. David has handled the programming at that for 10 years, Brad. And each time you let him out on the slopes and nobody leaves, right? Or if they do, they're stalking him or the next person that had some engaging thought. So I hope that this is one of those things that you say, I'm glad I came out for. I'm glad I risked whatever to come here. And I got to be around these great people and the family and all that other stuff. But David's one of the smart kids in the family. You know, you got dumb kids in the family. You got the dumb cousins and relatives. David's the smartest one here, and he brings value every time. And I know when he's working on it, and I don't even bother to go ask him why, because he doesn't ever tell me. I saw you over here yesterday. And not everything I say has a point, potty mouth, okay? Sometimes I just look at the audience, I know they're not eating all, I'm not gonna dump the whole load when it's coming down, you know? But I try to keep people laughing. But anyway, nothing can make me happier than David saying he would do this, to being interested in doing it, and to watching it unravel with the rest of you. But now, really, a standing ovation for David, because he does it.